Put one finger down if you've ever had doubts about your faith or Christianity. Okay, put one finger down if you've wondered if you can trust the Bible. Put one finger down if you've wondered whether what you believe actually lines up with the Bible. Okay, put one finger down if you've been hurt by the church or watched other people get hurt by the church and wondered if Christianity in America has been a net positive or a net negative for the world. Okay, now put one finger down if all of those things happened while you were in full-time Christian ministry. Okay, so maybe that last one is just me, but if you put your fingers down, you are not alone. All my fingers went down. Sometimes when we have doubts and questions about our faith, it can feel like something that's always been a central part of who we are is coming apart. And the fear is that if we entertain those questions, we're going to find that the religion we were handed isn't worth believing in. You were handed a faith. We all were. It came to us through our parents, our pastors, traditions, even our experiences. But eventually, we grow up and face adult problems. Life happens. We lose someone we love. We face crushing disappointment, or the darkness in the world, it just becomes too great to ignore. And when it does, these things force us to take a closer look at what we were given. So we ask questions. We examine what we believe and why to see if any of it holds up. And this process is called deconstruction. It's like tearing a house down to its studs to see if the structure's sound, to find out if it's still livable. Deconstruction is pulling apart and examining our faith to see if it still works in the real world. Now, if you've ever heard deconstruction talked about, it was probably in a negative light for some understandable reasons. Because many people who deconstruct their faith end up walking away from it completely. Their church hurt is so great that they can't imagine walking through the doors again. Or the way Christians and churches have responded to the biggest issues of the day seem so at odds with their values that they don't want anything to do with the God who could support any of that. And I get it. I've experienced all those things. That's why many Christians and many church leaders are afraid of deconstruction. But as someone who is a full 5 fingers down on that deconstruction scale, I have a hard time rejecting it. Because if a faith structure isn't strong enough to withstand questions, can I trust it with every part of my life? If a religion can't tolerate doubt without folding, is it a religion worth following? Some people walk away because they were never even allowed to wrestle with their questions in the first place. I don't think deconstruction is inherently harmful. And sometimes examining what we were handed is exactly what faithfulness requires. I think the problem comes when the process ends there, when it ends with taking things apart, and when nothing gets rebuilt. See, tearing a house down to its studs to get rid of everything that isn't structurally sound, that can be good. But you still can't live in it. A house without walls and a roof is uninhabitable. But when you rebuild with a more trustworthy blueprint, it becomes a structure you can actually live in, a home. So for me, a deconstructed faith is never complete without some sort of reconstruct. When we examine the beliefs we were handed, we let go of the ones that don't hold up and rebuild around beliefs that are more in line with the character, nature, and teaching of Jesus. That's a reconstruct. That's the process of being a disciple. It's surrendering to a teacher and allowing him to reshape what you think and what you know. That's why I believe deconstruction can become discipleship when we allow Jesus to identify our bad beliefs and behaviors and rebuild us more in his image. I think you can see this process all throughout the letters of the Apostle Paul. He primarily wrote to Christians, people who already followed and believed in Jesus. And you know what Paul spent a lot of time doing? Identifying beliefs and behaviors they had wrong, challenging what they thought they knew, and helping them become more like Jesus. A great example of this is in 1 Corinthians. There were these factions in the church that were divided over all kinds of things, including whether it was sinful to buy and eat food that had been sacrificed to pagan idols. And Paul wades into this in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 1. He says this, "Now regarding your question about food that has been offered to idols, yes, We know that we have all knowledge about this issue. But while knowledge makes us feel important, it's love that strengthens the church. See, everyone was certain their side was right, that their belief was correct. And Paul says, I get it. You know you're right. You have it all figured out. And I know honestly how good that must make you feel. But then he drops this bomb in verse 2. He says, anyone who claims to know all the answers doesn't really know very much. Do you know anyone who thinks that they have all the answers, that they have the Christian life all figured out? Or maybe you're the person who has it all figured out. And there's no reason to examine your beliefs because your beliefs are right. Full stop. But Paul says, if you think you have all the answers, you don't. I know this may come as a shock to you, but just because you believe in Jesus doesn't mean you know everything. In fact, Paul's real target here, it isn't the doctrine of food sacrificed to idols. The target in his crosshairs is certainty. The kind of certainty that makes us unteachable. The certainty that I'm right, that God is on my side, and that what I believe is unquestionable. Being a believer means being wrong sometimes. I mean, we all have things that we misunderstand about the life of faith. And when certainty makes us unteachable, it holds us hostage to those bad beliefs and behaviors. Because unquestioned certainty, check this out, it can even become the enemy of love. Let's read this again in 1 Corinthians 8, 1-2. Paul says, but while knowledge makes us feel important, it is love that strengthens the church. Honestly, it was the imbalance between religious certainty and Christ-like love in the American church that triggered my deconstruction. I saw deeply held beliefs expressed in harsh and sometimes cruel ways that didn't look anything like the love of God. And putting the church I was raised in under a microscope, it forced me to then take a hard look at myself. And you know what I discovered? The same imbalance between certainty and love existed in me. My own certainty smothered the love of God in my life, particularly toward the orphan, the widow, the immigrant, and the stranger. And it gave me cover to endorse beliefs, actions, and policies that hurt people. My certainty gave me the justification to ignore the suffering, the experiences, and the dignity of other people who weren't like me and didn't share my values. And that certainty made me blind to the ways in which I needed to become more like Jesus. And I had to become open to the possibility that some of the things I was most certain about didn't actually look like him. And if we're going to examine what we were handed and allow Jesus to rebuild it, it requires a totally different posture. Jesus describes it this way in Matthew 7:7. It says, keep on asking and you will receive what you ask for. Keep on seeking and you will find. Keep on knocking and the door will be opened to you. This saying of Jesus might be very familiar to you, but what may not be is that this isn't just a one-time thing. Jesus is hinting at more than just an ask once scenario and then you're good. Asking, seeking, knocking, these actions are all ongoing in the Christian life. The assumption is that followers of Jesus will keep coming back to him with their requests, their questions, their doubts, and their needs. Jesus is pointing us toward a posture of curiosity, a willingness to keep asking and keep seeking, to keep admitting that there may still be something he needs to teach us. But you know who struggled with Jesus the most? The Pharisees. They were enormously certain that they understood God, they understood what he wanted, and what faithfulness looked like. But the irony is their certainty made it difficult for them to recognize what God was doing through Jesus. They couldn't entertain the possibility that some of their beliefs didn't align with his kingdom. And the people who were most certain they understood what God was doing were some of the first ones to miss it. And that's the kind of certainty we're talking about here. The kind that keeps us from being teachable. But curiosity keeps us teachable. It leaves room for things that we don't understand, for things we've gotten wrong, and the things that Jesus still wants to show us. See, unasked questions don't get answers. The unanswered questions They don't disappear just because we were afraid to ask them. They still hide under the surface, where we learn to avoid them or just repeat by rote the answers we were given and tell ourselves that we shouldn't have doubts in the first place. But the questions don't go away just because we don't look at them. Curiosity gives us permission to bring them into the light and to say, I don't understand this. I need to know why I believe what I believe. And is this really what following Jesus is supposed to look like? You were handed a faith. Some of it might be beautiful and strong, totally worth holding on to for the rest of your life. But some of it may have cracks that you never noticed. And maybe that some of what you believe was shaped more by fear, culture, politics, tradition, or someone else's understanding of God than it was shaped by Jesus. And eventually it's all going to be tested. You're going to have to take a closer look at every bit of it. And when you do, I want you to remember the goal. It's to examine what you were handed, discover what actually belongs there, and allow Jesus to keep rebuilding your faith more and more in his image. Tearing a house down to the studs is part of the project. But then comes the rebuild. And when you rebuild, the question becomes, what blueprint am I using? And for me, the answer is Jesus. His life, his character, the way he treated people and what he taught, the way he loved and the people he moved toward. I want my faith built around the blueprint of the kingdom that he came to bring into the world. And so maybe the way forward is simply this. Question what you inherited, rebuild around Jesus. Now, this requires curiosity. It requires enough humility to admit that some things we are certain about might be totally wrong. It requires open hands that can release what no longer belongs there and receive what God wants to give. And that's the posture I want toward God. Jesus, keep teaching me. Show me where I've misunderstood you. Expose the things I've confused with you. Help me let go of what doesn't look like you. Keep rebuilding me in your image. Your questions may be part of what leads you closer to Jesus. So bring the doubts, the things that don't make sense anymore, and the beliefs that you're afraid to touch. Bring your hurt and your anger and your confusion. You don't have to choose between your questions and Jesus. Ask them. Stay curious. Question what you inherited and rebuild around Jesus. Let him be the blueprint, because that's when deconstruction becomes discipleship. When we examine what we are handed, allow Jesus to show us what belongs there, and let him continue rebuilding us more in his image. Question what you inherited and rebuild around Jesus. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you next time.